welcome everybody to Spin Legal today. It's March 19th, 2025, episode 58 with Angela and myself. But today we are joined by Justin O'Donnell. Hi, Justin. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Peter. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, how are you doing there, Justin? Yeah.
Thank you also, Angela, for having me.
Okay.
Yeah. And just to confirm, everybody, we're dealing with an episode tonight on environmental law. I've called it part one because, in fact, actually, we look as if we're going to come back for another one. This is really to introduce what is environmental law, what are some of the concerns that we have, etc. We'll discuss that with Justin, who's been doing some work on environmental law.
Yeah.
All right. So just as an intro to everybody, if you need to contact Invictus Legal, you can do so on 905-688-5598 or email Angela at weareinvictus.legal or me at peter@weareinvictus.legal. Okay? So here we go today, and an overview about environmental law. So Give us an intro, brief intro in a couple of paragraphs, Justin.
What kinds of things are included in it?
Okay, well, when you say environmental law, that it's kind of funny because it's like saying let's eat American. And that it is a very interdisciplinary field of law because what you are doing is you are dealing with a wide variety of areas, water, air, indigenous, nuclear. You are also dealing with municipal issues as well, and a whole host of things. So to say environmental law is something that is finite or exists in a bubble, that is completely indirect. If you are going to do something like this as a career, you have to be prepared to go in with a very broad mind. You have to have interests in a wide variety of fields, and not just environmental issues per se. You have to open yourself up to some of the regulations, and they can be a bit dry, but also you have to open yourself up. Like what I found, like I had done a course over a year ago through Seneca College on environmental law, and a lot of the issues, whether it be dealing with federal or provincial, are grounded in constitutional law. So having a very strong background in constitutional law would behoove you if you are going to enter into a field like this.
So if you're a member of the public and you think you've got an environmental legal problem, what would you do?
Well, first of all,
clearly, obviously, there's some differences here. We know there's differences between.
There is. I mean, first of all, there is no one easy answer. I mean, it depends on so many variables, Peter. Let me. Okay, first of all, I'll explain. If you don't mind, I'll give a minute or two. About my own background. I have always been interested in environmental issues. I was never like a rabid environmentalist. Like I wasn't someone who would go out and chain myself to trees or try to threaten to blow up ships or government industries.
You never had a blockaded
radical ones like Greenpeace, but
no, at the Line 9 protest.
Pardon?
Didn't see you at the Line 9 protest when they were all protesting.
No, you won't. I mean, in all honesty, in fairness, I actually consider myself to be more of an environmental conservationist. Now, a conservationist is someone who cares about preserving the land, but with a focus on preserving wildlife and wildlife preserves, because that is really where the heart of environmentalism starts. I would consider myself a conservationist in much in the same vein as one of my political role models, Teddy Roosevelt. And he did a number of things during his presidency to help the environment in many, many ways. And I think a lot of that, like he had, don't get me wrong, he had so many accomplishments. It was amazing. But that's one that I think, well, it's not ignored, but in some ways it gets a bit of short shrift or is kind of sidelined in comparison with other things he's done. But no, I think he was someone who thought very much ahead of his own time when it came to environmental issues.
I was going to say back in those days, probably the environment was rarely considered, or you'd have to be kind of somebody who's really out there, kind of in the lead, if you know what I mean. You know,
exactly.
10 or 20 years ahead of your time.
Exactly. I mean, he was very far thinking, to his credit, and not just in environmentalism, but in a number of other topics. A lot of people really don't appreciate, the fact that this man was truly a Renaissance man in so many fields. But I'm kind of digressing at this point.
Yeah. So what can you tell me about like in terms of laws, environmental laws, like the differences between the federal environmental laws and the provincial environmental laws here in Ontario?
Okay, well, you have to understand that there is a constitutional jurisdiction first and foremost, so like I was alluding to earlier.
Yeah.
And environment, they don't really call for environment per se in the Constitution, because again, that is covered by so many other departments, such as water, agriculture, natural resources, for example. So, but to answer your question, Angela, federal legislation deals primarily with issues, say, relating to fisheries, shipping, international trade, and commerce, and in certain instances, even criminal code law. But that's very rare, and we'll get into that later on. Because there are other environmental statutes that can deal with those quasi-criminal offenses more effectively. But anyways, those are the areas, in the most general terms, that the federal government deals with in terms of environmental law. Now, provincial powers with regards to environmental law, again, there's nothing there that in the Constitution or the BNA Act that states this is environment and this is the exact terms. It refers to other areas that have already been delegated to the provinces. Examples would be matters of local nature, matters of civil rights within provinces.
So things like local developments and local rivers and
that would be yes, that would fall under municipal, and that is certainly
wetlands, greenbelt,
agriculture, forestry, mining's preservation of certain crown lands.
Yeah.
As well. So yes, I mean things of those nature. To be more accurate, I mean, does that answer your question? Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So there were certain things, there were certain rules and rights that we might have based upon federal law, but the vast majority of things are governed by the Ontario, largely, I guess, the Environmental Protection Act.
There are actually several pieces of legislation, both federal and provincial. Now, some of the most common ones you will find federally. The most prominent one is the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, which you alluded to. We also have the Canadian Environmental Assessment Act. And again, that's very important. And I will discuss environmental assessment with you later on during the course of the interview. Pest Control Products Act, for example, the Canadian Shipping Act and the Arctic Waters Pollution Act, as well as the Fisheries Act, and even transportation of dangerous goods and services. I mean, this is a very multidisciplinary field that we are dealing with. I mean, you just can't say, everything. It's you can't just put everything under one umbrella and just say it's all environmentalism. It's not.
Yeah, so in fact,
So I can't put like small nuclear bombs in the mail, for example.
Well, at that point, that's probably going to go on to maybe terrorism. At this point, again, that would be like a rare criminal code one. But what can you do? But I mean, again,
they are.
And
they are obviously an environmental concern, aren't they? And putting a nuclear bomb.
It is, but there again, as I state, and we'll discuss this again during the course of the interview. It's very rare that criminal code application and procedures are used in issues dealing with the environment. It's actually very rare.
Yeah.
But we'll discuss that more in detail as the.
Okay. So what is the role of the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks in Ontario?
Well, the rule, again, as I referred to, they are responsible for protecting local nature and conservation of, say, crown lands such as provincial parks. Conservation of wildlife within certain provincial wildlands, and again dealing with agriculture,
greenbelt.
Pardon?
Wetlands, greenbelt, that sort of thing.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. I
mean, the ministry was created. Interesting.
Yeah. To answer your question, Peter. It's designed the way the constitutional structure, such as it is designed. It allows for provincial application of environment that deals more with the immediate needs of the individuals and even the municipalities, because how environmental issues is dealt with within municipalities, that is a direct responsibility of the province.
Because obviously we understand environment, the word environment, we understand the word conservation, and we don't necessarily think of putting the word parks in that mix, if you know what I mean, do we?
In the course of my studies, there are a lot of things I would not have thought you would tag on to environment. But again, with the parks, that comes with conservationists, environmentalists like myself. And I'm not saying that there's nothing wrong with dealing with other environmental issues, like dealing with agriculture or growth of say vegetables or trees or whatnot. But again, from the vein,
species at risk.
Species that are at risk, yes. That I think that is when you can address issues like that, it acts like a domino effect that will affect all other areas of the environment. I mean, that's just my opinion. And you will find other environmentalists down the road, fellow ones, they will have their own opinions, and that's fine. And I would encourage you listen to them. I'm just giving you my own perspective on it. Take it for what you will.
Yeah.
So I just want to know, like, in prior governments, they've had a Ministry of Environment and Climate Change. They called it that. And then they changed it as soon as this government switched over to Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks. Is that where, like, when they do the name change, is that more like a change of priorities, or is it just more of a change?
Yeah, I find that's a very politically motivated move. A lot of it depends on the government in day, or the premier in day, or in some cases even whoever they have selected as the environment minister or the point man on the environment brief for that matter. Because again, and this is where it gets interesting, in government, both federally and provincially, there are several briefs that straddle not only environment, but natural resources, water, transportation, agriculture, in some cases, even indigenous and Aboriginal law.
Mhm.
So, I mean, you to say there is one, those briefs do have to be shared in some
Mhm.
instances, or there is joint work done on between the Environment Ministry and, say, Natural Resources, for example, or Indigenous Affairs,
Mhm.
Yeah.
or Ministry of Oceans and Fisheries as well. I mean, and I'm using those just as basic examples because, I mean,
There's some overlap.
it is an interdisciplinary field, and as a result, it does have a tendency to get complicated. And as a result, the average citizen, they do have problems following this, and it's not because they are idiots or anything. It's just the way the system is set up is so complex. It's very difficult even for an educated individual and a policy one myself at times. You just to keep track of everything. It's
Mhm.
And it occurs to me that obviously, if you were to do, if there were some, and I'm picking it deliberately like this, if there were some pollution got free, let's say in Lake Michigan, and I understand that that's across the border in the United States, but that would clearly flow downstream into into Lake Superior, potentially into Lake Superior, into Lake Erie, into Lake Ontario, and potentially out through the St. Lawrence waterway. So that has, whilst that might well come under the remit of Ontario Ministry of Environment, Conservation and
I
Parks.
would argue actually that would be more under the federal remit
That would
because
be International Joint Commission, wouldn't it?
yeah, exactly. That's for example, that's
Yeah.
one example. But also, I mean, you're dealing with contaminants that are coming from a foreign power, and they are dealing with they're affecting with lakes. They're affecting several lakes in the province, and you are dealing at this point now with foreign policy, even international law. So, I mean, yes, it can and it will eventually devolve down. Some of the effects will have to be dealt with.
But the same,
Provincially, but I would say in a situation like that is primarily a federal matter, and even then, I mean, again, what can I
but
say?
again, things like pollutants that might happen in, let's say, in an industrial area around the corner from where you live, those could escape into the natural waterways, etc., couldn't they?
It's entirely possible, yes.
Yeah.
And again, and that has potential to affect matters on a municipal, provincial, and even federal, depending on how far this is taken, and depending on the what legislation is going to be used to be applied to the situation. And so,
And I've been deliberately vague in terms of I just talking about substances escaping there, and clearly some of these will end up being provincial offences. Some may even be criminal offences, mightn't they?
They are. I'm going to address this for a second. I want to state that in most cases, especially federally and provincially, they have a number of statutes in place already where if you are in fact found to have committed grievous acts against the environment, whether you be an individual or a corporation, and you are subsequently convicted in a court of law under that legislation, and I'm talking about environmental statute, not criminal code, you are facing massive fines, possibly even prison time, and not only that, but a lot of these statutes, they make it quite clear that if you were an officer or a board member of a company that has committed egregious environmental acts, and they have been found to do so under these environmental statutes, guess what? You those board members, it will not be just the company that faces the fine. The officers and the board directors are now facing serious jail time. And sorry.
Yeah. So for example, if I were to go out and pour a gallon of oil down the local drain outside my house, I could potentially be, could be fined or worse.
You could, yes, you can. And again,
I don't recommend that, of course, to anyone.
No, I wouldn't recommend that. And it's funny because many years ago, I had done a course at Brock University. It was taught. I was working on a certificate in public administration at the time, and I did a course on environmental policy and management. And this was a very interesting one because, one, we learned about a lot of the actual environmental issues and some of the effects that were going on, but also we learned, among the other things, this was an interdisciplinary course about the law enforcement angle of it. And we had the benefit of having a special investigator with the Environment Ministry come. Dr. Dreyfels, who was the instructor, asked him to come. This was, first of all, a very interesting man. He was one of the most intense individuals I have ever met in my life. According to him, to himself, he did not smoke, he did not drink, and according to the professor, he could not be bribed under any circumstances whatsoever. No, I'm not joking, because there was a case that came up. One of his friends was the head of a company that was dumping chemicals into a field, and they did not tell the families of children that were living there that they were doing this. And as a result, children, we were going in there, they were suffering severe burns. Some of them were going blind. And as a result, this man was ultimately sent to prison for 3 years. And this man also happened to be that investigator's one of his best friends. So I mean, this is that is an example. I mean, these things do happen, and there are it's a lot of people don't seem to realize. They think, well, okay, an example of an egregious environmental offense. Oh, you went and threw a Coke can on the highway while you were driving or something. It's like no. There are far more serious offenses, and they have very devastating consequences.
Yeah, and I was going to say, whilst throwing a Coke can on the highway is not to be recommended, and is bad for the environment,
or even throwing a lit cigarette out of the window as you're going down, particularly in a place where there's a drought, that could cause a forest fire.
Well, at that point, it's coming into again. That's coming more into criminal code, but again, that's very rare when it straddles into a criminal code offense, because again, they have more than enough statutes and laws that offer very strict infringement. And one of the things I want to point out is that in a lot of cases, these environmental statutes, they function on the basis of statutory guilt, in that you don't necessarily have had intent to.
So it's almost like a strict liability.
Exactly. And a lot of people don't seem to realize that. I mean, you are judged by the level of responsibility you've taken, the due diligence as well. Were you acting as a reasonable individual would when you were committing this act?
Mm-hmm. It limits you.
Okay, so if you were throwing the cigarette or the Coke can out of the car window as you're driving down the highway, that might well be a breach of the environmental laws, more likely to be a criminal code matter.
It could be both. I mean, it's not unheard of. Sometimes you have you've had individuals face charges under both environmental statutes and criminal code.
But again, that's less likely to be charged that way. What they're more concerned about would be that if you were a gasoline tanker and you were leaking gasoline down the highway.
Exactly. Yeah, that would be a more appropriate example. Yes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And
So-
that being more common, hopefully not too common, given the consequences that could happen to human life and safety. But yeah.
Yeah, and not that we wish any of that to happen, but we know that these things have happened through accidents or through whatever reason they have happened, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, and okay, so these concerns, it can impact small business, large business, of course individual homeowners. I talked earlier, didn't I, about me throwing the wasted gas or the bad oil out into the public drain or something. Not that I recommend it, but it is potentially is an environmental nightmare, isn't it?
It could, yeah, because I mean there could be a snowball effect in that one seemingly small act can start building up. It can lead to greater problems, lead to greater consequences, and before you know it, you have got a serious environmental impact in terms of damage to the community, people getting sick, maybe someone even dying.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
this
this is
always reminds me back in the 80s, they had Hooker Chemical Company up in the New York side of the Niagara River, where families were being poisoned literally because Hooker Chemical
this is
Company buried their drums underneath the ground,
Mhm.
and people were getting sick. And Lois Gibbs, who was one of the leaders of the Homeowners Association of the Love Canal, they were pointing out where she actually pointed where all the cancer cases were, and it coincided mysteriously with where all the drums are buried.
Yeah.
And this was made into a movie and a book, and I had the pleasure of meeting her when we were dealing with a proposed site in West Lincoln. We managed to go there and do a people's voice and stop that from happening.
Exactly, and there are movies out there that explain this. Like, and I know I've talked to you about this before, Angela, and I think probably with you, Peter. The movie with John Travolta,
Yeah, a civil action. That
and,
actually was
and I
based on
recommend
the story
anyone
of
who has
Kilburn.
any interest in environmental law
Yeah,
watch it. It was a true story, and it was just amazing the lengths that this company went to try to protect themselves and the
wear down the legal
harm
team.
that these poor people had suffered at their hands. At the end, it was just it was shocking, and but at the same time, it was also very educational in terms of both environmental law and of course civil litigation in general, especially in the United States. Now, I'm obviously not an expert in United States law, but still, it covered a lot of environmental themes that I think are common universally across the world, and I definitely recommend that as a go-to movie.
Well, what was interesting
was
at
the
the end
film?
of that movie, it showed like when Travolta was just bankrupt and everything else,
The
he
whole
started writing
firm
letters
went.
to the EPA, and he sent them all the documents, right,
Yeah,
including
the whole firm went
affidavits,
bankrupt.
and then all of a sudden these companies got charged.
Yep,
So
I know.
what-
The
what
whole
was
firm.
the-
It's sad because the whole firm went bankrupt. John Travolta's character that I recall, he had to
Jan
file for full
Schlickman. His
bankruptcy.
name is Jan Schlickman.
It was a disaster, and the irony was, the company in question, they offered, I forget how many,
20
3 or 4
million.
major settlements, and they rejected each one of them. Now the plaintiffs finally did win, but the offer they got was so far below what they were being offered for as a compensation to settle. I mean, they won, but this was what I would call the ultimate Pyrrhic victory. Was it worth it in the end? I mean, that's really only something the audience has to
Can you give the name of the film again,
say.
Justin?
Civil action.
A civil action.
It's
And
with
John
John
Travolta
Travolta,
starred in it.
William H. Macy, John Lithgow, a whole host of other actors. Robert Duvall, of course, he was playing.
Robert Duvall, he was funny. He was good.
He was
good
playing
as
the
one of
lawyer for
opposing
the company.
lawyers.
And it's just it was an incredibly well acted movie, and also a very topical movie as well. And again, if you have any interest in environmental law or just environmental causes in general, do yourself a favor, watch it. And even if you're not an American, so what? There are a lot of issues that were dealt with there that are going on all over the world. It's just a different legal application in terms of which countries' laws are being used to handle it. That's all.
Yeah. The other one, of course, is Erin Brockovich.
Yeah, Erin
Yes,
Brockovich.
an amazing movie.
Had
Yes.
an opportunity to meet. Good
for you.
Yep. And along with Hurricane Reuben Carter, at a time there is a fundraiser that was going on. And the thing that's interesting about her is that she started off, she got injured and she went to a injury law firm, and then she got a settlement from the injury law firm, and then she wanted to find work, and then she insisted on getting a job because she found some things when she was working as a clerk, and she's, we got to pursue this because she put two and two together, and she found that people were
I remember she was, and she had to fight everyone, even people within her own firm.
Yeah, she had to fight even with the firm's owner. Right?
Yeah,
And this was like fighting, like everything. And then he just said, okay, like, come on, just kind of let her go, like, just do this, right? And then she went up, and then and at the end, she got it.
She did, and she wound up in the end becoming, I guess, like the American equivalent of a paralegal. I realize they don't have the same rights that we do in Canada.
As a
She also
consultant.
became,
law firms across the country, and she does environmental cases.
And she also became a respected investigator. Now, I don't know if she ever took out her formal private investigator's qualifications, but still, she became extremely well respected within the American legal community. And again, that covered it was a true story, and it covered very topical environmental issues. So again, that's another sit down movie to watch. And I don't know of any, unfortunately, Canadian movies that deal with environmental issues. At this point in time, things could happen down the road. I would hope they would make some.
I love the movie about Lois Gibbs and how she took the Environmental Protection Agency representative hostage at the end, because she said, I gotta get these people. And eventually the government bailed out their housing, so because they bought all the housing so they could move. And then she started an environmental clearinghouse. Okay, so it's very interesting how the Americans bought this. I don't know too much about Euclidean equivalence either, but I think that we got to look at that and see if there are things.
There are, but I would.
But again, arrows is something that's going on.
Yeah, and there are, and again, with back to bringing this back to Canadian focus. I mean, another area you might want to look at is Indigenous or Aboriginal law, because they're dealing with a law of hunting and fishing rights as well, and that has a major impact not only on the environment but the livelihood of a number of Indigenous people throughout Canada. And what do you do? There are no easy answers.
The other one that, by the way, I saw a documentary a few months ago upon the events of 3 Mile Island, which is, of course, another environmental nightmare. It was
do you recall the name of that? It's
no, it was just called 3 Mile Island, as far as I'm aware. Yeah. It was about a 15-episode documentary about 3 Mile Island and other things. It did talk about Chernobyl, and it also talked about Fukushima Daihatsu and the problems there. But the interesting thing was that, of course, with 3 Mile Island, they managed to avert it, but I feel that more by luck than good judgment.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of stuff that's going on. Like there are right now political leaders wanting to focus more on nuclear as opposed to using fossil fuels. And I have some questions about that.
Well, I don't know myself. I mean, this is just my opinion, just digressing briefly from the legal aspect. If done properly, I think nuclear energy can be very safe and very beneficial. I think, Angela, what you're having flashbacks to is what happened in Chernobyl. Yeah. That was a horrific tragedy. Exactly. What had happened was they were using horribly outdated equipment, and that's not the case that's being done in Canada.
My uncle was working in a nuclear plant, Pickering, so he was doing that, and he was an engineer. there.
But again, we're looking at technology that has moved on in the last 50 years.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And
the biggest problem with something like 3 Mile Island was that there was no independent kind of authority that was actually, checking upon this. There was too much. The company was determined whether they could fire up the generator. It was all based upon profit and need, right? Not upon how somebody had considered the environmental aspects of it.
Yeah, there's always going to be a human factor in it, and what you're suggesting, there was.
But again, that's largely
stepped in, unfortunately,
and that's a largely political matter anyway. And what we're talking about here is the concerns that impact like small businesses, large business, individual homeowners, and essentially we could all be impacted, couldn't we?
Yeah. Your home could be built on something.
That's true.
Exactly. I mean, it's like I said, this is so interdisciplinary, and it can impact individuals, it can impact families, it can impact small businesses, corporations. As I said earlier, even members of the indigenous community and other communities as well. I mean, the
interesting thing about the indigenous community is when we're dealing with pipelines. Can you talk us a bit about pipelines and the process for building pipelines?
The process, well, that would be a federal one. Now, my understanding with that, like I admit, I'm not much of an expert on that, but there have been issues. That would be more in terms of, my understanding would be going at building them over reservation lands and whatnot, and violating treaty reservations. Now, again, and I freely admit, I don't know as much about Aboriginal or I should say indigenous law as I should. But again, that is an area that does straddle environment. And it's
wouldn't there have to be environmental assessments extensive before they even plan a pipeline built?
Yeah, you would, and I'll talk a little bit about environmental assessments. Environmental.
How does that work, and who does it?
Okay, environmental assessments, they can be done by a number of organizations, and I know this. I very seriously considered about 30 years ago becoming an environmental assessor, although nowadays it's called more environmental management. And I have done one or two courses through Seneca College, again, just through for my own edification on environmental management and assessment. Basically, what that is, and is not, frankly, not that difficult, to become one. And there are a lot of career opportunities in there, if you are so inclined. It would be okay. Say, Angela, you have maybe say 5 or 10 hectares of land.
Mm-hmm.
You want to do some kind of developing on, but you need to get permission from whatever level of government. For example, is that handling? What the environmental assessor will do, first of all, they're going to go and they are going to do a painstaking investigative process and find out every single legal document and land ownership and issue that has ever been connected with that specific area of land. And they will also, depending on the situation, they will conduct environmental audits and even hold hearings.
But a certain Mike Cushman will probably disagree with you, because if he's done lots of looking at former cyanamid land, former industrial land within the Niagara Falls area, and one of which is actually 4237 4th Avenue in Niagara Falls, which is now a set of townhouses that is actually people have moved into them. This is Niagara Falls, Ontario's version of Love Canal, right? basically,
Is this low-income housing, Peter?
no, it's not low-income housing.
Just regular housing?
It's regular housing. It's a regular set of townhouses.
Wow.
And what is happening here is this was the former YMCA building that was built next in the adjacent land to Cyanamid.
No, I understand.
Right?
I understand, and I don't think it's so much a matter of Mr. Cushman and myself disagreeing so much on the results. I was just discussing more the what's involved in the actual performance.
You see, the problem.
I mean, the actual results. I mean, you know. What comes? I mean, you have to do what you're going to do with depending on which actor you are in this year at the end of the day. But the problem lies is that they could look at all the documents they want for this plot of land. All right. What Mike Cushman said is put the frigging documents down and go out there and go and stick a plodder in the ground and go and see what chemicals you can get out. Because before this was built, before these new townhouses were built, he's reporting tar on the plots, on the land. Okay. Well, no, I understand that, and I appreciate that, and yeah, and you know, he was right to bring that up. But still, I mean, there is a matter of due diligence, and you do in a situation like that, you do have to get all the documentation, even though. You know, it seems kind of very slow and stuff, and obviously in this case, what Mr. Cushman was suggesting, there was more immediate evidence available, maybe something that was of far greater concern. But I'm just pointing out the process, and whether you agree with it or not, that's you know, that's
it didn't stop General Motors property on Ontario Street, which would be more familiar to you, Justin.
Sorry, could you repeat that, Angela? I didn't hear
the old GM plant on Ontario Street.
Yes.
That keeps changing ownership for some reason, but nobody cleans it up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And the city was threatening to even sue to have it cleaned up. Mm-hmm. And they're trying to build housing over parts of it. And
well, that's where you would get an environmental assessment and done at some point. I can't speak to what kind of assessment, if anything, has been done, and I will admit I'm not as familiar maybe as I should be with some of the local environmental issues, I should say. Mm-hmm. My experience from a legal perspective has been more provincial and national, and it's and it's no excuse, but then again, we're here to learn, and that will actually spur me to become more knowledgeable on it. So, thank you for bringing it to my attention.
Yeah. Because those are things that probably, farmers is another one here.
Yeah, I was going to say, there's issues like farmers. Obviously, you go somewhere like Cushman Road in St. Catharines, where it's a big, heavy industrial estate. You're probably going to find quite a lot of contaminated land, and contaminants, etc. Right?
It is, especially depending on the use of pesticides and whatnot. And again, that's why I consider myself more of a conservationist, because people who are environmentalists, especially those who are affiliated more with left-wing environmental dogma, they tend to think, okay, we need to use pesticides, other equivalent steroids to help growth and whatnot, and in the end, they wind up doing even more damage than what they wanted. I'm not saying they wanted damage, but they're not helping the situation. They've in fact made it even worse.
Okay, so one of the areas, of course, you were talking about is how it impacts on things like local municipalities. You've got areas in our area. We've got an organization called the Niagara Peninsula Conservation Authority, which deals with conservation matters in relation to both Niagara and on the edge of Hamilton. And they have an impact on planning, which of course impacts all of the municipalities from Niagara through to Hamilton.
Exactly. Well, I'll talk a little bit about the Niagara Peninsula Conservation Authority. What that is, it's one of approximately 36 organizations within the province of Ontario. Their primary objective is to deal with water management. within they're assigned geographic boundaries or whatever you want to call it, and that is their primary responsibility to make sure that the water is being first of all used in a responsible manner, and that is not being polluted or contaminated or whatnot. And
how you treat water too.
Pardon?
And how you treat water too at a municipal level.
Of course, that goes without saying. Yeah, it's yeah, it is. I mean, they do a lot, and and those are necessary government bodies. Because I mean, you trust me. I mean, you don't want to wind up in a situation, say like in Mexico or something, where they have nothing whatsoever, and you have to drink bottled water all the time, or you make yourself very sick. And
or in Flint, Michigan, when they turned around the pipes, which was a deliberate thing, and people were drinking lead in their drinking water.
Exactly. Yeah, but to answer your question, Peter, yeah, that is the kind of rule that the Niagara Peninsular Conservation Authority, that and the counterparts within the provinces, those are the kind of rules that they play, and they are very critical rules.
And people don't really think of the rivers and waterways that we have, yet pretty well, if you realistically go, walk a mile somewhere, you're probably crossing any number of rivers and streams in any direction that you go in. The trouble is, when you're in the city, we're in downtown St. Catharines right here, the chances are that you might cross 3 or 4 rivers in that mile walk that you do, but you won't know it because they're all underground.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And as soon as they're buried underground, the potential is that they could be attracting pollution as well.
Exactly. Yeah. It's. I mean, there are so many ways that water can get polluted. I mean, I can't even begin to count on them. I mean, you would have to speak with an environmental scientist. They could probably better be able to explain that than I could. I mean, my knowledge is more on the legal and policy side, but yeah, no, it's. I mean, joking aside, yeah, I mean, it's there is so much potential for water to be contaminated by so many sources. I mean, it is no laughing matter. So
yeah. Okay, so here's a serious question. You're walking along the road and you see a suspicious substance. What do you do?
What would you do? Okay, what exactly? Well, determine what exactly.
It says something's coming out of the ground. I'm walking down the street right near my place, and then I see something coming out of the ground or something.
A milky white liquid or something.
Some kind of strange liquid, and it smells.
I would contact the appropriate environmental agency to deal with that. Now, provincially, they do have they have natural resources officers, and they also have officers that work for the Ministry of the Environment. That would be my best guess. Go to them first. Do not try to handle it yourself. You're not an expert, and you can make yourself very sick or get harmed otherwise.
Yeah, because I think this is where probably for the majority of people, they see something and maybe they ran over it on the car, or they walked past it the other day and it's still there. Probably you come to see a milky substance and you think, it'll be gone tomorrow. I won't worry about it. But if it's still there in 3 or 4 days' time, in a week's time, then I think you probably should be worrying about it.
Exactly.
If it's gathering steam and it's growing.
That's another issue, of course. Yeah. And, and it's bad enough that if you look at, when we've talked about areas that have been polluted in the past, when they dug up an area in Niagara Falls as a Park Street site they wanted to do a building on, but they dug it up and found it was so contaminated they couldn't do it. Mm-hmm. Right? So at least the city takes responsibility and closes it down in those scenarios.
Exactly. Yeah, the city, or in some cases, depending on the severity, maybe the province will do it as well. Because again, municipal environmental issues are under the purview of provincial affairs, according to the constitutionally speaking. It's
yeah, and I suspect the vast majority of times when you see a suspicious substance, this milky white substance, just to poke what, just it could be anything, could be soapy, could be anything, right? You can see various types of, or oil, maybe even looks oily. But any of these types of substances, as you say, probably the vast majority of such spills are innocuous, innocent spills. Somebody
you could. That being said, would you want to, if you had a child, would you want to go near them at all?
Yeah.
I have nieces and nephew, and if there was something like that, and they happened to be around, I'd keep them away, and I would call the appropriate authorities, and I mean sooner rather than later. And I cannot stress this enough. Don't try to handle this yourself. You're not, in all likelihood, you don't have the training to do it. You're not a scientist, and again, you are jeopardizing your own safety and well-being.
Yeah,
by attempting to do that. There are experts within the appropriate ministries who have been trained to deal with this. That would be advice as both a paralegal, as a committed conservationist, and frankly, first and foremost, as a rational human being.
Well, it's not so much about the you being a legal expert or anything. I think it's about the rationality of it in at the end of the day, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because if you don't know what it is, it's best to stay away from it.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. I mean, like,
and if it's got a smell, the smell could be dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
You got that right. No, we're all in agreement.
The smell itself could be dangerous.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Like gas smells, for example.
Exactly.
You know how to block off a whole street when you have gas leaks.
Yeah, and that has actually happened in my even it permeates down to municipal affairs. For example, there is a little known bylaw. You can pull a fire alarm in a commercial or residential building if you have strong reason to believe that you are smelling something that resembles a gas leak. And I know this for a fact because I did work in the security field for a couple of years. And more recently, about a year or two ago, we had a tenant. She was strongly suspecting a gas leak coming from 2 units down. She pulled the fire alarm, and she was well within her legal rights to do so. So the fire department and the cops came. Good news. No gas leak. However, when they went into the units, bad news. They had these guys who were frying methamphetamines, which happens.
They were cooking.
So, needless to say, they were arrested and got evicted shortly.
Good.
Thereafter, but no, again, that's an example. That's a little known example of
actually, that's
regulations, and in this case, it's okay. You can do it if you act in good faith, and okay. Fortunately, there was none there, but it's still okay. It was a false alarm, but still resulted in a good thing because at least.
The thing is, even the meth cooking can burn the place down.
Pardon?
Even the meth cooking can burn the place down.
Absolutely. I mean, and even though technically it wasn't of an environmental nature, it's more of a criminal one still. I mean, hey, getting drug dealers out there, that's a win-win no matter what.
And let's point out, this is one of the solutions whereby actually the police can evict somebody from a rental unit.
Yes,
right?
They can. And I hate to say it, but that has happened on more than one occasion in my own apartment building. That being said, not everyone there is cooking meth and stuff, and a lot of the people there are just they want to go about their business, and they're frankly horrified by some of what's going on.
What I hear when they come back and call us, it's about a certain address, and they identify the address, and I said, oh God, another one.
But that itself is a separate interview for another episode.
We could have a whole interview about
that at some point. Let's again, this is about environmental issues, not law and order.
Absolutely. But again, cooking meth is potentially an environmental issue anyway. It's on the border of.
It is, but in the end, you realize that fell under criminal code.
It's a criminal code, and somebody's deliberately doing this.
Environmental statute
together that shouldn't be put together.
Code in that instance,
cooking it and with some heinous initiative, heinous ambition with it.
Yeah. Oh yeah. But like I say, at the end of the day, I personally don't care what statute, whether it be a federal or provincial environmental statute or criminal code. Those people are gone.
We want them out of here.
I don't want them in that apartment. So
yeah,
right. Exactly.
Absolutely.
Don't need them anywhere, basically, because they are a danger to the safety of other people around them.
Yeah. All right. Okay. So that's an important aspect there. And we've really just kind of scratched the surface of environmental law in the past, 50 odd minutes. I think we want to come back with another episode in a couple of weeks more time. Maybe we'll have some questions on the website afterwards. Maybe we can actually go down to some specifics.
Right? Well, you certainly know where to reach me. So no, I would, Peter, Angela, I would be more than happy to do it, because I think this is a very, not only is it a very important area, but it's one that is often, I wouldn't say misunderstood, but it's not everyone has a full appreciation or understanding of it. And a lot of people seem to realize what kind of an impact this has on so many levels of your life and in so many fields. And again, I mean, even government-wise, this impacts so many government policies, so many government briefs and departments. I mean, it's I can't stress that enough. And so,
yeah. And part of the issue here is that, and I'd like to say that probably the vast majority of industrial spills and accidents are probably innocent, right? But
it is, but again, as I pointed out,
there's liability, Peter.
There's liability. There's statute. There's statute. You are statutorily responsible. Whether you have to show. Did you show the standards of a reasonable person?
Yeah.
In a situation like that, it doesn't matter whether it was.
You have to exercise your due diligence.
Yeah, and it doesn't matter whether you used intent or not. They're not
going to care. Code regulations.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Oops, I forgot to put the smoke detectors in the building in my rental unit.
Yeah, and again, that would be something that would be handled in situations like that. That would be something that provincial and environmental enforcement
the fire code
handle. Because they tend to handle more like enforcement of issues in terms of that, whereas federal environmental enforcement officers, that they tend to deal with more outright criminal, whereas provincial ones deal with more procedural matters.
Yeah.
All right.
I'd be very interested in seeing the next time when you come in to speak with us and talk about some of the boards and tribunals that deal with environmental issues.
There are over 300 of them, and I'll be happy to
select some. Do the main ones.
Pardon?
Do the main ones.
Yeah. Okay. No, because I mean, this could turn into like a 6 or 7 hour episode, and I don't have enough time for that. Including
Law and Order environmental series. Presented by Justin.
But no, listen, I'd be quite happy to. And listen, thank you both for having me. This is a topic I feel strongly about, and and I'm looking forward to coming on again. And again, I do this primarily because I want to educate not only my peers in the legal profession, but the general public, because this is something we all need to take seriously.
Okay, and let me just sign this out by saying if you need to contact us at Invictus Legal, you can do so on 905-688-5598, or you can email Angela at angela@weareinvictus.legal, or me at peter@weareinvictus.legal, or even Justin at weareinvictus.legal. There you go. So if you get some emails, hey, good. So we are invictus.legal is the website. And as with every show that we do, this is Angela's moment.
Yes, and if what you heard today is on Spin Legal today, or in this show, or in other shows in our series, this is not legal advice. If you need legal advice, please specifically contact a paralegal or a lawyer who would be able to deal with your issue as it is. Yeah, we have a LinkedIn user who just said, yes, it's great information. Wow.
All right, there you go.
I love it. Spread around our site to everybody else so that other people.
Yeah, and I would point out, there are a lot of opportunities for paralegals to practice environmental law because, as I just said earlier, there are so many boards that you are eligible to practice at both federal and provincial level. I mean, there are very strong career opportunities.
Yeah, and this is a very interesting type of thing. And also, too, if you want to have questions for Justin or questions for us, or if you want to talk about another topic, or you have ideas for any further work in our series, please feel free to write to our emails that we were just given, or put in the comment section of wherever you're watching this show from. We'd be glad to see you and hear from you. Okay?
All right, and have a great evening and great week, everybody, and we'll see you on Wednesday next week.